Over time, that momentum gradually spreads into other grade levels or other school sites where now we have principals knocking on our door saying, hey, can I try this? Or, hey, can I attend this conference? Or can we participate in this staff development? And the answer 9 out of 10 times is yes.
How do you navigate change? It's a question we think about often, and one that today's world expects us to be comfortable with. The challenge, however, is where do you begin? And how do you develop the mindset and skills to be successful? You're listening to Designing Schools, and I'm your host, Dr. Saba Kidwai, educator, researcher, and storyteller. Join me each week as we explore design thinking and take a look at stories and strategies that bridge the gap between research and practice, as together we explore how might we design schools. Welcome to part 2 of my interview with Jerry Almendarez, where he shares the strategies he uses to build a culture of trust that inspires others throughout the district to experiment and try new ideas at their school sites. He shares how his goal is to create schools as incubators, where people can experiment, explore, and take risks as they design the culture and space that defines their schools. In part 1 of this interview, Jerry shared the importance of developing strategic foresight. In the book, Strategic Leadership in a Complex World by Dr. Wanda Austin, she says leadership is not accidental. You have to make the time and space with your team to be strategic in this complex and global world we live in. The culture and leadership that Jerry has established is not accidental. Each Friday, he made the time and space to bring his leadership team of over 180 people together to hear from a diverse group of speakers on areas that would enhance their practice and give them as leaders the confidence to experiment, explore, and take risk. I begin by asking Jerry to share his inspiration for these Friday meetings and what he was hoping to accomplish.
Those were interesting times because you take an extrovert and you take away society from him, from me, given COVID, right? I need to be out at the school sites. I need to be around people. I need to be shaking hands. I need to be looking people in the eyes and having conversations. And then overnight, that was all taken away from me and really put me in a dark space, almost a level of like professional depression, because I'm sitting here with everything shut down thinking, what in the world? How am I going to navigate this? We were getting devices out to the teachers, to the kids. We were getting calls about how do I do Zoom and staff development and how do I work this device? So all of these thoughts were going through my mind. And I thought the technology, we have to resort to technology in order to engage. So to answer your question of creativity and building trust among a leadership team is to take the leap of faith, to pull people together into a Zoom meeting and say, hey, it's going to be messy. This is the first time some of us are doing it, but we're going to give it our best shot and we're going to do the best we can with what we have. And there were a lot of mistakes up front, but we owned them. There were calls that were dropped. Half of the people couldn't get on. The Wi-Fi connection was bad. We didn't have the subscription that allowed for X amount of people to be on, so people couldn't get on. And we went through all of these issues, but we didn't give up. It was myself and my executive cabinet that kept coming back, that kept apologizing, that kept saying, hey, we're sorry. This is new for us too, and we're trying to navigate this as well. So the first thing is don't ask your team to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself. And that's the vulnerability part of it is like, yeah, I made mistakes. Yeah, I was embarrassed. Yes, it happens to me. It even happened at board meetings and we apologize, but we're trying and we're going to keep moving forward. It's important. And so they got to see that. The other is really just to be able to make sure that people are in a safe enough space to really be creative. And I'll give you an example. Early in my superintendency, I had a mentor like my first or second year. And I remember sitting down with him and saying, as a superintendent, I don't feel like people respect me as a superintendent or my position. And after a few minutes of conversation, he turned to me and he looked at me and says, well, are you acting like a superintendent? And I paused, and I had been in my district for a long time, 25 years. And I don't think I was acting like, I thought I was a superintendent in Talbot. I wasn't acting like a superintendent. So it was at that point in time, that moment in my career where the light switch went on and said, okay, now you have to model what the expectation is. And so if I'm going to draw people towards this innovative mindset, then I have to model that. So what does that look like? That looks like holding meetings via Zoom, using the devices that we're expecting teachers to use in the device. My frame of mind was if the principals aren't in that space and using it, then the teachers aren't in that space and using it. And that was based on my observations when I went out to go visit school sites. So how do you change that? You model those behaviors and you model those expectations. You change the principal meetings. You change the leadership team meetings. You pull in experts. You pull in a diverse group of individuals that talk about the things that they're doing in their spaces and the opportunities that principals or leaders in education can take and use these tools to help them navigate those spaces as well. And you take risks. You try it with a staff member, you pick a grade level that's interested and you give them the support and the resources to go do it and report back to you when they're comfortable reporting back to you. And over time, that momentum gradually spreads into other grade levels or other school sites where now we have principals knocking on our door saying, hey, can I try this? Or, hey, can I attend this conference? Or, can we participate in this staff development? And the answer 9 out of 10 times is yes. So it's just creating that environment where the expectation is that the leaders lead by example and that we give our stakeholders, our staff members, the opportunity to experiment, explore, and to fail and to learn from those failures. I like to think of the mindset of creating these incubators district-wide. Like each school is an incubator and they are charged with creating their innovative space, whatever that looks like. And so my task as a superintendent is to create a district of inventors or to create incubator spaces so people can thrive.
In 2019, I led a research study at Design 39, where I took a look at how they were using design thinking practices to challenge many of the traditional aspects of school. A resounding theme throughout the research was that the culture of trust and vulnerability led to a culture where people felt safe, allowing them to take risks, collaborate, and navigate change. Here's a quote from one of the interviews that I did at Design 39. They shared, "We have a very open communication system with our leadership, and they take feedback really well. We don't spend lots of time on what and how we say things. We can just say, we need to stop this so we can be the best people we can be." As I mentioned, this was a sentiment that was shared campus-wide at Design 39. In the interview, they go on to share, this feeling of support extends beyond leadership and is a sentiment that is felt amongst colleagues as well. Another colleague being interviewed built on this idea and said, because of the history of school, educators don't really trust each other. But at Design 39, we can walk into each other's rooms. This is important. It took a while for us to get here, but we are here now. Another colleague who was part of the interview further elaborated in talking about the power of joint decision-making. In the beginning and now, they shared, we were involved in all the decisions. When you're involved, you have ownership, and you're interested in revising and making the vision for designing school even better. As we discussed in part 1, too often decisions about change are made for people, not with people. When designing schools becomes a collective experience, there is a collective investment on behalf of everyone in the outcome. It's not this is what the district is doing or this is what leadership wants. It's what we're designing, what we're creating. And allowing everyone to be part of this narrative allows everyone an opportunity to bring their unique strength, their art to the table. Jerry shared with us what innovation meant to him and the strategies that he's utilized to build a culture of trust and innovation. So what is it like to be part of this type of school culture? I want to introduce you to two principals, Nata and Carrie, and how this culture enhanced their leadership and the ripple effect it had at their school sites. Here's Nata Shin, the principal of Century High School.
I am Nata Shin, principal at Century High School in Santa Ana Unified. One of the things that I really appreciate about Jerry and the series of Friday leadership management meetings is the ability to understand who our superintendent is, what he's all about, what is his vision, what he sees in himself as a leader, and therefore, who do I have as an example of a leader in our district, and for me as a leader at my own site, and doesn't have to be a principal as a title, but as a leader at your own site, you kind of learn the style and you have a vision of where he's heading our leadership team and where our district. So one of the things that I truly, truly appreciate is that he continuously updates us with new information. During the pandemic, we felt the need of readjusting our grading policy. So he brought in Doug Reeves to talk about grading. What are we grading the students on? Access, resources, or we are grading them on mastery, proficiency, or what else are we grading? What does grading look like? And then there will be time. So that was giving us some background, give us some information for us to think about, reflect, and have conversations with our own group that we are leading. Not necessarily a principal, but as an assistant principal overseeing grades, trying to inspire or influence other people, you learn from that and you formulate your own thinking and you use that to lead and influence others in the group that you are leading. Doesn't have to be a principal. Principal can be the entire school, but as an assistant principal, whoever it is, you have your own group of people. Another part that I really enjoy is when he brought in videos, he brought in who is a person with authenticity, Thomas Murray. And then he would introduce us to books like Think Again by Adam Grant. He would bring a guest speaker like yourself to share with us. And I love, and my first time learning this word is reverse mentor. I never heard of that before, but because you were one of the speakers, other people may have heard that term many times, but I heard it for the first time.
I'll pause and share in case you haven't heard the term reverse mentor. It was new to me as well. When Jerry first asked me to come speak to his leadership team, I was humbled to hear that he saw me as a reverse mentor. He shared how he believed it was important to eliminate age from mentorship, expand learning networks, and that we can learn as much from older generations as we can from younger generations. I talked specifically about 2 experiences when working with district leadership: the impact that the 2007 recession had on me as a learner, and how I dealt with finding my place in a world of work that school didn't prepare me for, and what we can do now so that other learners don't have that same experience. I also talk about my experience returning to school in 2018 for my doctorate, where I had the opportunity to research how design thinking is being used in K-12 education. Returning to school was not only an opportunity to engage in research, but it was an empathy experiment, an opportunity to be a learner, experimenting with the technologies and ideas that I advocate for. This podcast is an example of one of them. Today's world offers us the opportunity to not just read and cite authors and write a paper, but we can go out and engage with those individuals, find them on Twitter, and adapt the research and findings into different mediums so that they're more accessible to an authentic audience, one that goes beyond our professors and the classroom. Whether you realize it or not, we all have reverse mentors. We're all learning from those older than us, younger than us, the same age as us. It's the intersection of these learnings that allows us to be agile in how we navigate change. Now, back to Nata.
All of these things is just to formulate me as an aspiring leader to think, so what do you use as your core values? What style are you in order to lead your own organization? From all of these series of Friday leadership meetings, Jerry had taught me that leadership or being a leader doesn't mean you just take the information from one source. You allow the inclusiveness of other people, of people of different generations, different backgrounds, and the new resources to come to you. One of the things that I didn't think that he would bring in is you, because it's a reverse mentor. It's different because you're not someone who has been there, done that, but you're the one who comes from a different perspective of doing a lot of conversations, doing a lot of research. You've gone through so many different interviews and you share with us the things that you have heard and learned. It's different from some other mentors that we have who've been there, done that. So that's something new for me. And Jerry has shown me that he is a leader who is willing to learn, open-minded, and always a learner, because he would allow videos to inspire us. He would allow the books to give us some conversation and just dive deeply into that area so that we can grow ourselves. Because of all of that, I know that Jerry is the one who wants to open space where people can speak the truth, where people can just use that as an opportunity to grow and maybe allow people to make mistakes and allow people the opportunity to just take risk. And because of all of that, I allow myself to open up, take risk, allow creating an opportunity where my staff, my teachers, my leadership team members feel free that they can tell me what the truth is. So one of the examples is that, let's talk about grades again. That's a very hot topic in our district. So we have some grading policy where the floor is raised to 55%. Early this school year, we come back to school saying that we are not using that policy anymore. We revert back to what we used to do, which is just 0 to 59. That's an F, 60 and above, so on and so forth. Because of who Jerry is, he allows people to share their perspective. I'm allowing my ILT members, I'm allowing my teachers to share what their thought process are and what their thinkings are behind all of these policies that they do. So we were going for a while, 0 to 59 until November. Our district realized that this policy does not work. It doesn't help our students. So now let's rethink and allow people the opportunity to rethink our grading policy. What would it look like? So long story short, at the end, the board policy is at 50%, is raised the floor up to 50%. Some teachers, because of their high integrity, they do not allow or they do not necessarily agree with the 50% flooring grading policy. So they bring up their grading category to 80% on assessments and 20% on classwork and just student work. And let's pick English, ELA, or social studies as the two subjects where teachers are having the category broken down onto 80% on assessments, 20% on effort. Think about how much it's going to hurt the students whose English is not their first language, who reading proficiency is not at grade level. Let alone my school site, we have a good number of students who have IEPs and who also are newcomers where they only have less than a year or two in learning English and being in America. So those conversations is necessary. Like the who Jerry is on Friday reminded me what I need to do to have conversations with my staff, especially that department who have changed of categories in their grading department. So I came and talked to them and I say 80% on assessments is kind of a lot. And I understand your integrity, because your integrity is if you don't know all these contents, you don't deserve to have A, B, or C letter grades. I do understand the integrity because as a teacher, when you give a grade, you know that you have your signature on that and say the student deserves an A because they know this much of content. I totally understand that. But I want you to think a little bit about being an English learner, being away from school, haven't had the opportunity to speak English or learning extra English during 17 months of quarantine or distance learning. So how would your grading policy be fair, or what are you grading our students on? Back to resources, access, or their effort. What are you grading our students on if you give this breakdown this way? And I ended up being vulnerable. And vulnerable is another thing that Jerry talked about because he brought the books from Brené Brown and he talked about Dare to Lead, the book as well. With all of that, and I was being vulnerable. And I say, as I told my staff, I'm a principal right now, but my background, I haven't learned English. My first time learning English ever was when I was 14. Came to the country for the first time. I came from Missouri. So in that state, in order to get a high school diploma, you have to pass two tests, the U.S. Constitution and the Missouri Constitution test. And it was some type of essays or there's a lot of writing to it. But my teachers was empathetic and understandable enough. So they gave me two sets of questions, multiple choice, 100 questions on each, and say, why don't you study all these and take your multiple choice parts instead of the writing like everyone else? The empathy, the understanding that I wasn't able to speak English. And even if I was, that was so much content, so much background. It's a series of contents and timeline, all of these things. Like I was never able to pass that test. The teachers wouldn't let that test hold me back and hold back my diploma. So that diploma didn't necessarily say I knew everything about US Constitution or Missouri Constitution, but it showed everyone that, yes, I did put in some effort. Maybe I didn't have all that content, but I was graded on my effort instead of the content. That conversation was powerful because we got an opportunity to share. They share their perspective. They listened to my story. I got a chance to be vulnerable and influence somewhat of what I go through as an English learner and how I was being judged or graded back then and how it's relevant to today. And that story that I don't think I would be comfortable sharing had it not been for the learning that I have gone through this past, 17, 18 or 2 years with quarantine on the Fridays leadership meetings. It gave me opportunity to use my weakness as a strength to lead and to use a vulnerability to share so that there's empathy that are spread out a little bit more wider. And in the end, hopefully it benefits the students that we are serving.
Grading is on everyone's minds. We know what we have isn't working. And when we think about the system as a whole, it can feel really overwhelming to even begin thinking about how we might change it. Yet if we don't take step one in having the conversation, we'll never get to where we need to be. More importantly, we'll never know where we could get if we have the conversation. I love hearing how the weekly Friday meetings Jerry held gave Nata the confidence to take step one and have those conversations with the teachers at her site. I asked her to share, how did the teachers respond to these discussions?
They liked it. The immediate reaction, you can't see. I just shared, we just talked, and I just left it as that because sometimes a conversation doesn't require an immediate response. But then the actions, speak louder than words, right? And so my teachers definitely have done a better job in assessing our students. They remain the integrity of 80% on the assessments, but they have given the students a lot more opportunities to take a test, retake the test, and take the test and retake the test, and multiple ways of measuring their knowledge instead of just one way of writing essays. So they have the combination of multiple choice. Some of them are just having a conversation and grade on teamwork. And some of the assessments are based on a short paragraph on a reflection on an event in the history. So I am pleased to see that they're not grading the student just based on one content 5-paragraph essay, because our English learners are not able to do that. But it's broken into multiple pieces of collaboration, of multiple choice, which at least, some of them can guess. And then some of them would be responding to a prompt instead of an argumentative essay or something a little bit more advanced. And the students, I spoke with some of them at the end of the semester briefly, and they say, well, I'm so glad it was broken into 5 parts instead of one big day for 2 hours. And to me, the influence, the story that I share, not necessarily change everything that our teachers wanted to do, because they've been doing that for so many years, and you can't change a behavior in just one conversation. But the success in this story is that it gave them an opportunity to rethink, reflect on the work that they do, and share empathy, yet keeping the integrity in the way they grade or judge our students on their knowledge of the content. So that to me is a success.
We're all part of a system where we've been conditioned to do things that we know do not work for learners or for ourselves as educators and leaders. It takes one person to be vulnerable, to take a risk in saying, how might we do things differently? And as Jerry says, creating spaces where we can experiment and explore what works well in our learning communities. Next, I want to introduce you to Carrie. She, like Jerry, was also new to the district and shares how the leadership meetings helped her navigate what she calls principling in a pandemic. Here's Carrie, the principal of Garfield Elementary in Santa Ana Unified.
I'm Carrie Braun. I'm the principal at Garfield Elementary in the Santa Ana Unified School District. And I came to St. Anne at about the same time that the superintendent did. I have been principaling pretty much during the entire pandemic is where I joined just 2 months before Jerry did. And so 4 months before the pandemic started. And I've had the opportunity to work with my teachers. And when we went off on the pandemic and the school closure, I barely knew who everybody was. So I was trying to build trust remotely with these people who really didn't know who I was, didn't know how I led, didn't know what I was doing. We barely knew each other's names. So I pretty much had to use the pandemic time and my time with them in the virtual setting to build trust slowly with them.
So let's go back a little bit then and tell me, first of all, so you're a new leader, you're joining the district and you have these Friday meetings. What did those mean to you? How did they influence your practice?
So that let me see how Jerry really led and how he was very vulnerable with us and he was always transparent with us. And I'm thinking, okay, so if he's transparent with us, I need to really be more transparent with my staff and tell them, what really, honestly, we don't have answers right now. None of us have been in this environment. None of us have been through a pandemic. So we are all trying to figure this out together. And Jerry was always transparent with us every Friday, telling us, he didn't have the answers, but this is what he knew at this moment and how this information could change the next hour, the next day, the next week. I myself took that information and would share this is what I know now. And when I know more, I promise I will share it. I had to be vulnerable with my staff. I had to be very, very transparent. And it was really good to see the leader, the superintendent, doing that with us, knowing that it's okay, because we're all going to make mistakes during this time and we're all going to try to figure it out together because we've never done this. And, now even still on those Friday meetings, they don't occur as often as they did during the initial pandemic time. He still is always sharing with us, being so vulnerable and telling us what's happening at the executive cabinet level. And these are the things that we're working on. And so then I share that with my staff. And I think they have never had that before in a leader. They always felt as if the principal was someone who had coveted information and they kept it until we had answers. But the environment we live in now changes so fast that I need to get the information out. So when I have the opportunity at every staff meeting, we'll share what I know.
Listening to the principals and their alignment with one another in their ideas and experiences, you'll think that they were all recording in the same session. They weren't. These were all individually recorded, yet the alignment is simply beautiful. I asked Carrie to share the impact that these ways of leading had on the culture at her site.
In addition to also being a new principal and principaling during a pandemic, my school site also went under a massive construction project. We were moved in April 2020 from our school site. We all had to pack up and move the entire school across town to another location for temporary housing while we were hoping students would return in August. So here I am, a new principal in a pandemic, telling the staff, and guess what? We're moving and we'll be back after construction. So they really had to trust what I was saying. And I had to really also follow through with making sure that my communication was always transparent with them. I had to be clear and I had to be honest and tell them, okay, this is what's happening. You have to trust me. When we come back, our school site's going to be beautiful and it's going to be amazing. And it's going to provide so many opportunities for us and our students. So just trust the process and trust me in that. So that would be one example I could use, that during a pandemic, we're also under construction and moving and they're thinking, oh gosh, what's happening right now? And Jared did come out to my community forum for that and help answer questions with the community and explain that this is going to bring so many opportunities to the school site and allow our students to have exposure and experience with things they've never had before. My instructional leadership team, when I came to the school site, I knew some of the work I wanted to do was around mission and vision because I read it on the website before I got here and I thought it's very outdated. It's not what I see as how I want to be a leader. And I knew that we had to rewrite it and we had to kind of center ourselves around what our new mission and our new vision was going to be. So I took some of the things from all of our guest speakers that we had, you being one of them one time at one of our Friday meetings, and all the people that we had that Jerry brought in to help us become better leaders. I took different pieces of that in training my instructional leadership team to then really understand the importance of rewriting our mission and vision. That was a big endeavor. And I tried to get input from all the stakeholders. So I really trained my instructional leadership team, who then took the information to their grade levels. I sought information from my school site council, and we came up with something that all stakeholders felt this is where the direction we're headed as a school site.
Nasha and Carrie both share something that I didn't expect to hear. They didn't just talk about their experience from the weekly meetings and the impact it had on their campuses. They both shared how this opportunity gave them insight into the values of their superintendent, Jerry Almendarez. They both share how him modeling vulnerability, risk-taking, and by creating the time and space, gave them the permission they needed to lead in that way as well. Ultimately, these meetings were an opportunity for everyone in the district to build deeper relationships with one another. A powerful reminder that building strong relationships isn't just important in the classroom, it's important in all our buildings and in all our communities. Throughout our conversation, Jerry has mentioned his past experiences a few times. So I asked Jerry to share a few inflection points in his own life that have shaped him into the leader he is today.
So there are two parts to it. One is education is my second career. I was actually an accountant. I went to school to be an accountant and then very quickly discovered that I hated every minute of it. I respect accountants, but I cannot do the job as an accountant. I found myself sitting at a desk, staring at a computer for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and then periodically having to go out on job sites to audit books. And it was not what I was hoping it would be. I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't have the mentorship. I didn't occupy the spaces that I should have occupied in my youth, but I ended up getting my degree in finance and then becoming an accountant. I'll even back up a little bit more and be a little bit more vulnerable with you. It took me just to give you a glimpse of the kind of student I was in high school. It took me 12 years to get a 4-year degree. Life happens in mysterious ways. There were a lot of situations in my life that happened that ended up delaying a lot of the decisions that I had to make. A lot of those decisions were bad choices by me that set me off course a little bit, but then getting back on course. Ultimately, my wife was going to school to be a teacher when I was an accountant, and she got tired of me coming home and complaining about me not liking my job so much. And she said, why don't you go and get your transcripts analyzed and sub until you figure out what you want to do? So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go do that. So I got my transcripts analyzed, and because I had a degree in finance or a background in finance, I was able to teach math. Math teachers were in demand back then. So right away, I got a math job. And 2 weeks into that class, 7th grade math at a middle school in my previous district, and 2 weeks into it, I knew it was the right place for me. It didn't feel like a job. For whatever reason, the students and I connected, and 25 years later, now I'm the superintendent. And if you talk to my friends in high school, never, ever would I have expected to be a superintendent of a school district, let alone a large urban school district. That was not in my cards when I was in high school. I was not the student that I'd hoped to be. But for whatever reason, I'm in this position. The path that I've taken has put me here. And what's made me the leader today are a series of events that have happened since the time I became an educator until now.
Hold on a second. Before we get to that second half, then tell me, I'm curious now, what are some of the things as a student you felt allowed you to ultimately make that transition or ultimately got you across the finish line? Because so many people just give up on those students or have judgments or whatever it is. But I feel like there's often things that allow for some people to move over that threshold that other people just don't get. And so I don't know if you have something like that, but was it anything specific for you during that time, during those 12 years that allowed you to cross that threshold?
So 2 things really drove me to cross that threshold. One, it was being tired of the lifestyle that I was living. I actually did a TED Talk on that, what we're talking about now. It's just being fed up and tired with the lifestyle that I was living. And I'll just leave it at that. And then the second thing that really motivated me was being tired and fed up got me to sign up for college and continue to go to classes. What got me across the finish line once I got once I got fed up with my lifestyle, what got me to finish across the finish line was really negative experiences that I had throughout my young adult experience of people telling me, "What, you're going to school? You're going to school? What are you going to school for? You're not going to graduate." All of those little negative comments and those little snarky little remarks that got under my skin made me even more determined to finish so I could just come back and have with a smile on my face, say, "Hey, I'm a graduate." So those were two things. I come from a blue collar working family. I had to work during the summers because of our financial situation to help offset some of the costs. I have two brothers and sisters. I don't regret my childhood or my young adulthood, but I just wish things were different. And I got caught up in all kinds of things, made some bad choices, which put me in the situation I was in. I tell people I spent the first half of my life messing with society, and I'm spending the second half paying it back. That's why I feel the passion that I do, because I don't want, in the TED Talk that I'm talking about, I talk about a young man named Michael. And so I want to help the Michaels of this world so they don't have to go through those challenges or experience that frustration. And they can enter the world and into society with confidence and the conviction that they're going to go to college or they're going to be successful. Where for me, it was like that all of that doubt was just being poured on me throughout my whole career. And I'm the only one to this day in my family that has a 4-year degree.
I'm sure many of us will resonate with Jerry when he says, "I never imagined that I would be where I am today in high school." And neither did I. Yet the irony, it's in high school where we place the most pressure on students to finalize their majors, careers, and pathways. That stress is a large contributor to the mental health pandemic we're seeing across our country. In December of last year, Surgeon General Vivek Murthy brought to the forefront the mental health crisis confronting our youth. While this definitely is not a new challenge, it is one that was exacerbated by the pandemic. From 2009 to 2019, the share of high school students who reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness increased by 40% to more than 1 in 3 students. If you search in Google, "school is," the first 3 responses that auto-populate are "school is stressing me out," "school is a waste of time," and "school is making me depressed." Last summer, the 74 published the results from a student survey in an article titled "Depression, Stress, and Anxiety: Leading Barriers to Learning as Access to Trusted Adults Drops." In the article, youth cite overwhelming workloads with assignments that lack relevance to their daily life and futures as part of the cause. One student shared, "School restricts me from being content with who I am. We need to radically change the education system. It's way overdue for that, and it needs to happen right now. I can't even get out of bed anymore. I hate school more than I used to. I'm mentally strained because of distance learning." However, an English assignment and 11 other assignments are due by 11:59 p.m. tonight because grades are so important, more important than surviving and finding new healthy coping mechanisms. This is part of the challenge of what happens when learning takes place in silos, when instead of looking at how we might design interdisciplinary experiences that are relevant to the lives of students and their futures, we might be able to move from 11 assignments to 1 relevant, all-encompassing project. We return now to Jerry's past experiences. This time he shares one of the proudest moments of his adult career.
We have a large family, a lot of cousins and nieces and nephews. We were so large that we couldn't fit at one person's house for the holidays. So we would go to a park. Well, at this park, there happened to be a local university there. And so 40 or 50 of my family members would gather at this park for these various holidays. And my mom would always look at me and say, "You're going to graduate from here." So long story short, I ended up graduating from the university at the park where we used to go to, but I ended up becoming an adjunct professor there too. And I remember one of the proudest moments of my adult career was getting my first pay stub from that university, going to my mom's house and putting it on the kitchen table where she was making dinner. And I slid it over to her and I said, "Look it." And she looked down and she was like, "What's this?" And I said, "It's my pay stub from the university. Look at what it says. And she read it. She said, it said Jerry Almendarez, adjunct professor. And you could just see the tears. Her eyes started to water up, and she gave me a big hug. But that was like, I didn't want to let my parents down. So anyway, professionally was that one example of the individual that said, you're not acting like a superintendent, or are you acting like a superintendent? The light switch went on. I was not. I was still the assistant soup of HR. I grew up in the district that I was superintendent in my previous district, so I knew everybody. So when I became superintendent, I still fell into that friend category, and that had to stop. It wasn't about I'm the superintendent, and I had to act and model that. So that was one phase. The second part, I went to a conference and I talked to the first or second year as a superintendent. You happened to be at one of these conferences. It was a superintendent's conference. I'm sitting at a table at the keynote speaker session with a group of my colleagues, about 12 colleagues. The room has about 500 superintendents in there. And the keynote speaker asks the audience to raise their hand if they're on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. I don't think Instagram was available at that time, but Facebook and Twitter. Everybody at my table raised their hand, but me. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And I look around the room, and at least more than half of the room, the hand was raised. What that told me at that time in my superintendency was I'm in the minority when it comes to occupying this space. I was fairly new. A lot of the people that were around me were older and more experienced superintendents. So I thought, if anybody should be in the space, it should be me. And I wasn't in that space. So very quickly did I learn I need to get into that space and learn more about it. That's when I started getting on social media professionally. And then as time went on, a few years later, I started superintendent book clubs. And I would do them with students. And there are two students that I interacted with that really changed the trajectory of my leadership, because I got into the superintendency education to help people like Michael. And I encountered these two young men, and the unconscious bias that I placed on them was unjustified. And I'm embarrassed to say that I felt the way that I did, or I thought the way that I did. And long story short is, in 1 year, I met this young man named Eric who came in. He looked like a gangster. He had Pendleton, everything. And I thought he was in the wrong place. So we had the book club, superintendent's book club meeting at a high school. All these kids come in. Here comes this young man in, all gangstered up with everything that you would perceive to be a gangster to have. And he sits down next to me, and I'm thinking, what is this kid doing here? And long story short is, he handed me a manila folder. It had a couple of articles, a couple of poems in there. He asked me to read them. He was an author, a published author, and a poet at age 17. And the reason why he was there is because he wanted to be a part of the book club with the superintendent and other students from his school that he normally wouldn't react with. And so he decided that he would take it upon himself to join. And he sat right down next to me. So that was one. A few years later, we did another book club. This young man, Tamarian, comes into the class, or comes into this book club setting. It was an AP class, right? We were reading a book called The Other Westmore. He comes in, similar dress and environment as Eric. And so this time I don't say anything. I just sit there and think, okay, let's see what this is all about. Anyway, so as we're having this dialogue and discussion, I can see his eyes, I can see his thought process going. And then all of a sudden, boom, he just starts to share. And he's the most articulate, most charismatic young man who came in, again, looking unorthodox in a way that kind of would worry some people. But he was the smartest kid in that room at that time. I got to know Eric and come to find out that at a very young age, he was arrested and convicted felon. And here he is now in an AP honors English class. So I asked him, I said, what happened? He's the oldest of three siblings. He's raised by a single mother. He told me, he goes, Mr. Almendarez, he goes, I'm getting pulled in the wrong direction every day. I go home and every day I wake up, and he goes, I want a better life. There's something else better for me out there. So that's why I'm focused on my academics to break the cycle. And just an amazing kid, amazing story. And it's those two young men that really surfaced my unconscious bias, because as a leader of color, my intent was to get in to help people like me. But very quickly did I find I became part of the system that I evolved in essence, became like the man. And now I'm treating people that I was trying to help the way that I was trying to avoid. But those two young men changed the trajectory of my superintendency in a very positive way. And now, break down those subconscious bias and those barriers. And then the third change in my career is when we were in COVID, in the space with other colleagues from across the country, trying to identify ways to reopen in-person instruction and make it better than it was before. And then quickly realizing we're talking about creating a system for people that aren't part of this conversation. And that's when the light switch went on and said, okay, I need to have multiple conversations. I need to get input because I can create what I think is good, but without talking to the people, to the parents, to the students, to the teachers, to the principals, it means nothing. That's the stage that I'm in right now, is the conversation stage. And people are like talking about buying platforms or buying which devices. And I'm like, yeah, that's good and that's great, but what are you doing to change? And I don't see a lot of that thought process out there other than we have to buy this program, this device, this platform in order to do better. And I'm not convinced that that's the best way to go. So that's how my professional trajectory has changed over time.
Jerry's stories are worth pausing and asking ourselves, what indirect messages are we sending to those in our care? What assumptions do we make? And how do those influence the relationships we develop and the conversations that we have? Earlier, you heard Nata's passion for changing the way we think about grading. Grading is also one of the things that a student cited in the article by the 74 as being a leading cause for anxiety, stress, and depression. Grading sends silent messages to students in so many ways. It's often a distorted reality of your strengths and weaknesses. I know I can speak for myself when I think back to the D's and the F's that I received as not being a reflection of my strengths, my gifts, and my ability to make a contribution in this world. I want to take you back to Nata. She shares a story of how she acknowledges and lets the students in her care know that there are other admirable qualities that aren't always found on a data dashboard. Here's Nata.
My school, compared to the district, we may not have the most high-performing schools such as reading, writing, or math, or even in, let's say, attendance or anything else. But I think one of the components that never been mentioned on any dashboard is the ability of having the empathy for other people. One of the things that the school started this year was a giving tree, acknowledging that during the pandemic, there are many people who are going through some tough time and continue to go through and fight through these tough times. So the staff, the ASP students, have a theme called Give and Tree, where they wanted to donate 100 gifts to the elementary students who have gone through the most, but then successfully shown improvement through the work, attendance, it doesn't matter which one, but just most improving. And so they collected the gifts and they went to the 3 feeder elementaries and shared the gifts. So each student the donor would receive an ornament just cut by construction paper, say ornament, and it has a student's name on it and a little bit of their story and what that student wants for Christmas. So I was walking around campus and do my supervision like I always do. So I ran across the student and he was like, Miss Shin, I'm so excited. I said, what are you excited about? You know, I got this ornament of this kid. He's a 3rd grader at this elementary. He loves Star Wars and he loves this character. And I'm not a Star Wars fan, so I didn't know who that character was. So he said something. He said, you know what? It's funny. That's the exact character that I really like. And I can't wait to go to Target and get this gift for him. I'm like, oh, that is so kind of you. That's really nice. So if you're getting that for him, what are you getting for yourself? You know what he said? He said, I was going to get that same gift for myself, but now this kid deserves it more and I can only get one. So this is going to go to this kid and I'm sure it's going to make him very, very happy because that's what I really want. That conversation made me feel extremely small to the student who may not have a lot, but he's willing to give everything to another person who he thinks is more deserving. And the joy and the happiness that he gets is from making another person happy. And he never know who this little kid is, what he looks like, never have met the kid. But that was a joy for this Christmas season because he's able to give something he really likes for himself to another person.
While we can't change systems in just step 1, we can impact those in our circle of influence through the relationships we cultivate and the values we model and acknowledge. In part 3 of my interview with Jerry, we discuss an aspect that Jerry brought up in this conversation and is woven throughout our first 2 episodes: the role of social media and how leaders can embrace it to encourage creativity, build trust, and inspire a collective vision. Jerry's stories exemplify the ripple effect of transformational leadership and what happens when you create a community of learning that enhances and develops a culture toward innovation. Jerry also highlights the proliferation we're seeing with technology. Like many of us have experienced, without a clear vision for the problem we're trying to solve, or the vision for how technology will be used in alignment with our strategic goals and how we want to design schools to be relevant for learners, it can become one more tool without a purpose. Without this clear alignment and without a clear vision, it's hard then to design effective professional learning opportunities. It's hard to measure outcomes. And above all, instead of feeling like something that is inspirational, it just feels like one more thing. In my final Part 3 interview with Jerry Almendarez, we discuss how Jerry stays relevant as a leader, how he sees the intersection of leadership and social influence, and how he's transformed traditional roles within his district to help create new opportunities for people to find their art. It's your turn to join the conversation by sharing what you enjoyed or what questions you have. In a world where time and attention are so valuable, thank you for choosing to listen and for being a part of our Designing Schools community.